I'm going to demonstrate how to take bottle 3, it's orange juice carafe design, and do a rendering in PET plastic, clear PET plastic with the juice on the inside. So this is a little bit more complex than doing just a polyethylene opaque bottle that I did in the last tutorial. So like I'd mentioned, we're not drawing pictures, but we're actually building geometry and photographing it. So it's a little different process than just drawing. So with that in mind, we need to build exactly what we want to show. So the gray image way over on the right, that's our basic geometry that we have built. Way over on the left, the orange and the clear are the two parts that we need to build. The orange part is actually the juice. That will represent the juice. We need to build that as a piece of geometry so I can give it a reflective quality to it and make it look like it's inside of the clear piece. And then we have to build the actual clear piece. Now this clear piece needs to be built with a wall thickness so it'll render properly. I can't just have it as a solid opaque, a solid object. So it needs to have a wall thickness. So we need to build these two objects and put one inside of one another. The image in the middle with the label on it and the cap, that'll ultimately be our final construction that we are going to put into our point of view and render it. Okay, so let's turn this back into line. Okay, so I'm going to work in line to start with. It's view from the front. Let's just look at the bottle. So this is our bottle, our geometry. It is a surface, a front and back surface. What we need to do is we are going to offset it. You go to your derive tool, derive to section, and we're going to go to offset. So offset, like I had used this once before, is going to give us this object set at a certain distance, smaller or larger. So I'm going to make the juice 40 thousandths of an inch less than this outside object. So we'll set that now. This, for some reason, this one's going backwards. So this is at positive 40, but it is offsetting in a negative fashion. So we'll click on this and we can see how far that comes in. Okay, so you can see the red illuminated object is offset inside of this ghosted object. So that distance is 40 thousandths. So this is going to represent the juice. So what I want to do is I want to slice off the top a little bit. I'm just going to take a line about here. I'm going to make that a little bit lower. About there. So this is going to be my fill line. So this, like I mentioned, this inside piece is going to be the actual geometry of the juice. So when I render this, I want to see a fill line. So I want this to be a below the lip, the top lip of the bottle. So I'm just going to trim split this like we've done before. Trim split with line, and we'll do stitch so we can have a top to this. So we'll grab the object and trim split. So now I have that set. Oops, it didn't stitch. Why didn't it do that? Okay, trim split stitch. I didn't have it selected. Sorry. Select that. Trim split. That should be closed now. Okay, so it's good. Let's go back to our front view. So that will be our juice, our geometry. And we know that is now 40 thousandths of an inch inside of the shape. So what we want to do is unghost the outer shape that we started with, which is right here. This is going to be the plastic PET part. So we're going to select that. I want to make that have a wall thickness, a very thin wall thickness, so it will render correctly. So if I go to the derive to section and I go to thicken, thicken refers to making a wall inside of this object. Now again, normally I would use a negative number to make it go in. For some reason, this is offsetting in the opposite direction. So I'm putting a positive number of 30 thousandths. So that will make a wall thickness that comes inside, but it won't touch the juice. The juice is 40 thousandths. We have 10 thousandths of a clearance. If I make the juice geometry, the first part I made, if I make it touch the thickness of this wall for the PET, it will affect the color of the PET. It's what really happens in physics. And you pour juice into a glass or something like that. In effect, it makes the glass the color of that juice inside. So that happens here. It's like a reality that's occurring. So we want to make sure that they don't touch. I hope everybody follows that. So I'm going to click on this now, and I'm going to make a thickness for this object for our clear plastic part. And I'll show you the tolerance. So now that orange illuminated part, I will select it. And I'm going to move in very close here to this corner. So that part that is red, that wall thickness, that's the plastic PET part. And you can see the difference here in this wall. I'm going to select the juice part on the inside right there. That little distance from there to there is 10 thousandths. It's a very, very, very small amount, but it's enough to get our effect. We do not want that to touch. So we definitely have a piece of plastic outside of that orange component. So what we want to do now is give color and materiality to these two different parts. So let's select the outside part, which is here. And I have set up a plastic clear. Here they refer to as glass accurate. And I'll show you what I did with that. So I'm going to color that outside piece with that material. Can't see it yet, but we will in a moment. I'm going to select the inside part that has that trim line. I'm going to select that with our color. So let's just take a quick look at these two parts inside one another. Okay, so it's starting to happen. It's not there yet, but it will be soon. So another thing I'm going to do while I'm here close to this is I am going to select this piece of geometry, which is our plastic piece. I want that juice to really shine through. I don't want it to be obstructed by any shadows. So in Form Z, even if it's a clear part, Form Z will calculate a shadow as the light passes through this plastic part into the center, into the orange. I don't want that shadow, so I'm allowed to control those attributes. So we can go, I'm selecting this plastic part, we can go under Inspector, and we can go to Attributes here, and under Rendering, all these are selected. It casts shadows, it receives shadows, and it renders it as a surface, and so forth and so on. I am going to deselect Cast Shadows. So now that object will not cast a shadow. So I'm just setting that up for our rendering phase. So those two parts are ready. So what we are missing, and I have it over here on this other part that I had set up already, is the label. So I'm going to select the label. I'm going to select the cap. Let's just move in here, make sure I'm going to be accurate. And I'm going to bring those on center. I'll bring a copy, can't hurt. I'm going to select the middle of the bottle right on that bridge, right above the label. I'm going to select that point. It's snapping to there. And I'm going to bring these two over onto this bottle that we just made. So I'm snapping. It's not quite there. It looks a little crooked. I don't think that quite, it snapped quite correctly. So I'm going to move that over a little. Okay, I think that should do it. So by setting up all this geometry, okay, that looks good. We can then render. So that's all we need to do as far as building to get ready for this. So let's go back to our display options. Just like we did for the polyethylene opaque bottle, we had the 8.5 by 11. So that's ready and set up, and that will work, that size will work with our view. So I'm going to click on our view. Okay, so the reason this is working so nicely right out of the gate is because I have the lights set up. I set up all those lights when I did the polyethylene bottle. Normally, when I do two different finishes like this, like a solid polyethylene and then a clear PET, I quite often will start a whole nother layer, a whole nother file, actually. I would save this out and rename it because most of the time the lighting doesn't work for both. Sometimes the lighting has to be done differently to show a clear object versus an opaque object. I tried to do this in the same lighting sequence and it worked fine. So I'm leaving my lighting exactly the same as when I did the polyethylene opaque bottle. I'm just changing these materials and it turned out to work pretty well. So that's the reason I can get away with this. So we'll talk about the lighting again. So under our lights, I'm going to bring those up. They are illuminated. I just had them ghosted so we couldn't see them in our environment. So we have all these other bottles here that are not part of the rendering. So when I put our point of view in, we won't see those. But we can see our arrows for our different lights. So I have 4 of them now, and I've moved them around. I did that during the polyethylene rendering tutorial. So one of the extra lights that I did add was this one right here in the front. Wanted to illuminate that front edge. It's this one right here. Wanted to get light right on that front edge by the label because that was looking kind of flat before. So this is a time-consuming process. You have to move the lights around and then go to our point of view and then render and check and back and forth. It takes some time. So every object is going to be different. So this just requires patience. These arrows represent the lights, and we can go into each one of these lights. Double click on the light. And like when we set these up in the very beginning, we had a brightness and shadows. In this particular one, I turned all the shadows off except for that one light source that I had up at the top. And the intensity, I varied depending on what I was doing. Okay. Let's see, got 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Okay. So if we go back to our views, we select our point of view. There's one thing I didn't mention that I had done last time was this surface here that creates this reflection. So I have this circle, which is just a 2D round two-dimensional surface. The key is the materials on that. So if you go into reflection, there's one called Catcher. It's all it does is it doesn't show any kind of object color. It only reveals shadow intensity and reflectivity. And I can show you what that does. I have this set relatively low. You can vary these. You can make very intense shadows, or you can make them very subtle. So when we click on Render Zone, it is rendering that clear plastic part on the outside of the juice area. And then I have this reflective quality. That is a little bit too strong for me. I have a subtle little shadow. So I'm going to back off on that. So if I go back up to our catcher options, reflectivity, I have that pretty strong. It's a little bit too much. So let's go about here. Okay, it's a little lighter. I'm actually going to go into Photoshop and I'm going to soften it. That shadow looks a little bit too light. So let's go back and adjust that. Catcher, shadow intensity. Let's put that up maybe around 33. Okay, so a little bit more with the shadow. And like I said, I'm going to go back and feather that reflection out a little bit. So I just want to see a little bit of it. So that's it. So this is the combination of all these efforts. Obviously, we built our geometry. We made that nice and clean. We brought in our label art. We set up our perspective, our point of view, our display image size. And then once we got here, we did our materiality with the different parts that are in here. And we adjusted those lights. So a combination of all of these things together allows this to happen. One little thing I did, I haven't mentioned, is the another shadow effect that I took away. This cap, I eliminated shadow. I'll show you what it looks like with the shadow on. So we can go into our inspector, and under attributes, you have shadows off. I'm going to put them back on, and you'll see what happens. It's pretty subtle, but it made the very top surface of the juice quite dark. So I wanted to eliminate that. The actual bottle is not casting any shadow, so that didn't affect it, but it was actually, so it's quite subtle. So I'm just going to undo. See, you can see it right here, how it changed that shadow. So there are many ways to do this. You can play with this. I was happy with the level of highlights. It wasn't too overwhelming. I'm getting a little detail highlight on this edge of this label area. And then I got the bounce lighting on the bottom. Very similar to what I had in the polyethylene because it is the same lighting that I used. So I could save this out as a JPEG, which I have done already. I have it saved. So under display options, I'm going to go to the render zone area, and I'm going to do this background, which I had done last time. Again, there's lots of ways of doing background. You can bring in maps, you can bring in environments and put that in there. You can set this into environment just by loading them in this area. So you can do all that in Form Z. What I use is this gradient. And under there, I have, a subtle gray to a white. It looks like this. It's set up on this horizontal orientation. So, okay. And I am going to do this automatic. I'm going to render this right here. So this can be quite effective, especially depending on what you're buying. Like even this nice clear area looks good with that gray behind it. So it really gives a nice feeling there. I love doing this grayed out. It's just a very subtle, almost like a seamless background in a photo studio. I used to do them in black, and I used to put patterns, a whole bunch of things there. I've come to the conclusion over time, it gets a little distracting. This works pretty well, but it is a background. So when you trim this out or put this on a page in other presentations in a PowerPoint or a PDF or something like that, and you combine it with other things, the background kind of gets in the way. So I usually like to have it without a background, and I can trim it and have it kind of independent by itself, and I can use that image. So both of them work. Okay, so that's rendering bottle 3 as a clear PET bottle.